Master Yoshi told Hatsuka the key to reducing his physical pain. The master told him what he must do every day. Listen to this incredible story. Once there was a young monk named Hatsuka who lived in a small Zen monastery located at the foot of a mountain range in Japan. From a very young age, Hatsuka had shown a great inclination toward meditation and Buddhist teachings. While his companions preferred to play and run around the courtyard, he could spend hours meditating in complete silence, deeply connecting with his inner world. The monastery monks were so impressed with young Hatsuka's dedication and innate wisdom that they decided to take him as a pupil. For years, Hatsuka diligently studied the scriptures, meditated intensely, and strived to achieve enlightenment following the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism. However, despite his spiritual progress, Hatsuka faced a physical challenge that seriously hindered his practice. He suffered from intense muscle pains that threatened to diminish his monastic vocation. From a young age, his body seemed tormented by contractures and cramps that afflicted him even during his meditations. One cold winter morning, while Hatsuka was performing his morning physical and meditative exercises, an acute spasm shook his back, making him fall to his knees and twist his face in agony. His companions ran alarmed to help him, fearing that this new episode of extreme pain would finally break the promising pupil's will. "How much longer must I endure this torment to walk fully on the spiritual path?" lamented Hatsuka, his body trembling with suffering. One of the elder monks, the Venerable Master Yoshi, approached with an understanding countenance and placed a comforting hand on Hatsuka's shoulder. With the patience and wisdom that come with years, he spoke slowly. "Dear Hatsuka, there is no path to enlightenment that does not pass through one's own body. You must learn to listen to this temporary vehicle that carries your spirit. Only then will you find the way to appease its pain." After pronouncing these words, the elderly monk quietly withdrew into the temple, leaving Hatsuka reflecting on their meaning. Could it be possible that the solution to his physical torment was hidden in some teaching of the Buddha about the relationship between body and mind that Hatsuka had not yet discovered? Determined to decipher this riddle that fate had imposed on him, Hatsuka stood up with difficulty and walked pensively toward the chambers of Venerable Master Yoshi, hoping that his spiritual guide could illuminate the path to follow. He understood that he could not continue his journey toward enlightenment unless he first managed to appease his body's pains, and so began Hatsuka's search to find in ancient Buddhist wisdom the way to alleviate his physical ailments to continue his noble trajectory as a Zen monk. The Venerable Master Yoshi had become his most precious compass, and Hatsuka trusted that his wise words would end up guiding him toward what he still could not see but deeply intuited. After his last episode of pain, Hatsuka presented himself respectfully before the small wooden cabin where Venerable Master Yoshi usually spent his hours in meditation after guiding the pupil's spiritual practices. "Permission, Master," said Hatsuka. "Come in, young Hatsuka," the elderly monk responded affably. "You are always welcome. Tell me, are you still afflicted by your old demons?" "Yes, Master. The pain in my back returned today with more force than before during my exercises. I feared I would not be able to get up and that my dreams of following Buddha's steps would vanish forever. How can I continue my spiritual path with this burden tormenting my body?" Master Yoshi listened attentively, nodding with empathy to the troubled pupil's account. After a reflective pause, he spoke slowly. "You see, Hatsuka, the Buddha himself once suffered terrible pains, but thanks to deep meditation, he learned to free himself from physical suffering. He achieved a state where, although his body still suffered, His mind no longer identified with that pain. Seeing Hatsuka's gesture of incomprehension, the wise monk continued, "You must begin by strengthening mindful attention toward your body's sensations. Observe each tension or spasm without rejecting or clinging to them, like an equanimous witness of what arises and vanishes. Thus you will begin to dissociate from the pain. Then add sessions of meditation focused solely on your breathing. By calming your inconstant thoughts, you will also appease the physical and emotional tensions that aggravate your torment. Patience and constancy are fundamental in this path. Finally, I recommend incorporating gentle yoga exercises at the beginning and end of each day. The postures, conscious breathing, and fluid rhythm of movement will release muscular rigidities and increase your vitality to endure pain without anguish. You must persevere day after day in these mental and physical practices until you achieve harmony of body, breath, and mind. Only then will physical suffering cease to torment you, and nothing will stand between you and your spiritual search. Have faith, dear Hatsuka. Everything passes, even the most intense pain dissolves if we do not cling to it." The wise words of the elderly monk filled Hatsuka's dejected heart with joy. At last, he glimpsed a tangible path to tame the beast of his physical torments. He made a heartfelt bow before his mentor and bid farewell, eager to begin this new stage of his spiritual training immediately. "Infinite thanks, Master. You have dispelled the clouds of confusion from my mind. I will follow your excellent advice to the letter and report my progress weekly," exclaimed the young pupil with renewed hope shining in his eyes. The venerable monk nodded affably, fully trusting in the capacity of that promising disciple whom destiny had placed in his path. He knew that Hatsuka had the strength of spirit necessary to transmute this obstacle into a springboard, turning poison into medicine, curse into blessing. With a warrior's determination, Hatsuka devoted himself entirely to this new stage of his training. He no longer resisted the onslaughts of pain but received them as precious teachers who came to teach him secrets about himself. The solution to his torment now resided not in some external remedy but deeply hidden in the depths of his own relationship with that material vehicle that Buddhists called nirmanakya. Strengthened by his mentor's wise words, Hatsuka immediately began to put into practice the teachings to tame the demon of his physical pains that had placed so many obstacles in his spiritual path. As the Venerable Master Yoshi had indicated, his first steps were in developing his capacity for mindfulness, that is, paying full attention to the flow of sensations in his body. Every day at dawn, after his morning meditation practices, Hatsuka would isolate himself under his favorite tree in the monastery gardens. There he would adopt the lotus position with his back very straight, and proceed to explore with equanimity every corner of his physiology. Beginning with his toes, he would methodically tense and relax each muscle group, noting how the mere act of focusing his consciousness on them seemed to relieve chronic tensions. When inevitable spasms shook his legs or back, instead of his usual rejection, he would receive them almost with affection, like old comrades whose company no longer caused him havoc. For hours, Hatsuka would persist in this careful observation of his body, without expectations that the pain would disappear. His new objective was simply to become thoroughly familiar with this peculiar vehicle of his, with all its strengths and weaknesses. He thus discovered that many of his sufferings resided in chronically contracted muscle groups that lay beyond the reach of his normal consciousness. But by kindly bringing his attention to these opaque zones of his being, they gradually began to relax, as if melting in the warm sun of mindfulness. After a particularly deep session, Hatsuka experienced his first glimpse of what the Buddha meant by the dissociation of consciousness from physical pain. So the teachings were true. There was hope of transcending even physical torments through constant meditation. With growing motivation, the young monk continued week after week, observing in detail the designs of his corporeal form. His pains had not disappeared, but they no longer impacted his mental peace with such violence, nor seriously hindered his spiritual walk. After several months of exploring and familiarizing himself with the pain in the recesses of his body through constant mindfulness sessions, Hatsuka felt it was time to begin the next stage of his training. Following the wise advice of his mentor, the Venerable Master Yoshi, he would now incorporate into his daily routine prolonged periods of meditation focused exclusively on his breathing. He knew that by quieting the turbulent mind, he would not only achieve higher states of consciousness beneficial for his spiritual development, but would also allow the body to release chronic tensions that acted as fuel for his muscle pains. Thus, every morning before dawn, Hatsuka would enter a small rocky grotto somewhat apart from the monastery, ideal for its stillness and silence. There he would adopt the lotus position, keeping his back so straight that he felt as if they were pulling the crown of his head toward the sky. He would close his eyes and begin to focus all his attention on the subtle sensation around his nostrils caused by the flow of his breath. At first, his turbulent mind would wander again and again, involuntarily dragging him toward plans, memories, and daydreams. But Hatsuka had developed the patient skill of experienced meditators to, as soon as he noticed his attention straying, return firmly but without violence to the anchor of respiratory sensations. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, his breathing would become heavier and deeper, and with this quieting of his breath, the mental maelstrom would also begin to calm, like sand when the wind stops blowing over the desert. Sometimes this growing stillness would be interrupted by particular episodes of pain, when cramps in his legs or spasms in his back would suddenly burst into his field of consciousness. But Hatsuka had learned to welcome these visits as precious teachers rather than torments to eliminate. Without letting them disturb his meditation, he would cordially welcome them, and then gently return the rudder of his attention to the harbor of his breathing. And after a while, perhaps wrapped in the surrounding stillness, these bodily storms would also tend to subside on their own, as if tired of not receiving their accustomed reaction. Session after session, Hatsuka deepened his practice of samatha or meditative tranquility, allowing a subtle state of peace and luminous silence to settle in both his body and mind, transforming him from within. His muscle pain no longer prostrated him as before. It had become a tolerable companion on his spiritual walk. Encouraged by the progress in his meditation and the consequent relief of his chronic pains, Hatsuka felt it was time to begin experimenting with the next practice recommended by his mentor, the Venerable Master Yoshi, incorporating gentle yoga exercises into his spiritual routine. According to the ancient traditions of India, cradle of Buddhism, yoga constituted an ideal system for harmonizing body, energy, and consciousness. Its slow postures, executed with full attention and coordinated with deep breathing, were a royal path to release chronic muscle tensions. Thus, after completing each day of meditation in his favorite grotto, Hatsuka began to practice simple asanas under the tutelage of a specialized monk who resided in the monastery. At first, his battered body stubbornly resisted adopting the unusual angles and positions that this new discipline demanded. But gradually, holding each posture just long enough, his tissues began yielding and becoming more elastic. As he had been taught, before beginning any sequence of movements, Hatsuka would remain still for a few minutes, allowing his breath to deepen naturally. Then he would begin slowly stretching his spine, vertebra by vertebra, while coordinating inhalation and exhalation with each subtle movement. Almost immediately, he would feel how the mere act of consciously mobilizing chronically inert zones of his back relieved tensions solidified there for years. The pain might still be latent, but its intensity no longer seemed to exceed a certain threshold since Hatsuka had begun to inhabit these previously ignored territories of his bodily dwelling. Proceeding with gentle twists, extensions, and flexions, the young monk would allow each posture to unfold its effects before abandoning it. Joints would creak, tendons would sigh, muscles would release ancient constrictions, and in this organic symphony of readjustments and realignment, Hatsuka's old demons would gradually appease their anger, mitigating their fire. At the end of the routine, Hatsuka would remain for several minutes more in Savasana with his eyes closed, allowing the nectar of the benefits to infiltrate without forcing into every corner of his organism. He felt lighter, as if gravity exerted less dominion over his limbs. In this way, little by little, with patience and devotion, the young monk distilled the ancient Eastern knowledge about the relationship between body postures and states of mind, and thus managed to transmute part of the poison that had previously paralyzed him into curative ambrosia to continue his noble path. With unshakable diligence, Hatsuka advanced steadily but surely in his integral training to tame the demon of physical pain. Thanks to mindful vigilance over the designs of his body, prolonged meditation sessions calming the restless mind, and an increasing incorporation of yoga into his routine, the intense suffering that had previously seriously hindered his monastic vocation had now become suspended traveling companions. But his sagacious mentor, the Venerable Master Yoshi, had warned him that a crucial facet was still missing to complete this system of practices destined to dissolve suffering in its subtlest layers. He needed to develop radical equanimity towards any manifestation of pain in what Buddhists called nirmanakya, the physical body. Only when he could completely detach from any instinctive reaction of rejection or aversion to the torment of his nerves and muscles would it definitively lose its venomous sting, reduced to just another phenomenon in the ceaseless becoming of reality, empty of all substance or ultimate importance. Thus, during his meditative sessions, Hatsuka began to intentionally provoke those pains he knew so well, generating the movements or postures that he knew would trigger the most intense responses from his organism. But instead of avoiding these stimuli as before, he now embraced them with equanimity, refusing to identify with the experience of suffering. At first, the task seemed impossible, with physical torment clouding any detached perspective. But after months of training his capacity for mindful observation, expanding his consciousness through deep meditation, and incorporating a repertoire of yoga asanas for the nervous system, Hatsuka gradually began breaking that deeply rooted conceptual association between the sensations detected by his nerves and his self-image. So for the first time after endless years of struggle, when one morning his back contracted in agonizing spasms during his meditation, Hatsuka adopted an attitude of equanimous acceptance, limiting himself to observing the currents of physical sensations without being dragged along by them. And suddenly, after moments of deep stillness, there emerged a fleeting but luminous glimpse of that state his mentor had called dissociation from pain. Hatsuka then knew in the depths of his being that he was ready to transcend even this dimension of suffering. The months passed serenely like the clouds that cross Japan's spring skies. After much time of constant and unshakable practice, Hatsuka felt he was drawing ever closer to that visionary state where physical torment would definitively lose all ability to disturb the calm ocean of his mind. His daily meditation sessions, which in the past had been frustrated so many times by acute episodes of muscle pain that would shatter all his fragile internal balance, now seemed to proceed almost without bodily interference. When some inevitable spasm or contracture shook his limbs, Hatsuka had perfected the art of receiving it without reactivity, like one who imperturbably observes the clouds of a passing storm crossing the skies of consciousness. The pain was there, undeniable to his senses, but it could no longer nest anywhere in his psyche nor disturb the equanimity of his meditation. Even during prolonged sessions in complete silence, Hatsuka increasingly experienced that state of profound detachment from physical sensations that the Buddha had described in his teachings. The ethereal lightness he occasionally glimpsed fleetingly after many hours of yoga practice now seemed to accompany him constantly, conferring an ethereal grace to all his movements. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground when walking. His arms floated freely like heron wings in every daily action. When crossing paths with Venerable Master Yoshi in the gardens after completing his morning exercises, an enormous smile of pride and satisfaction would appear on the elderly monk's face, who with a simple gesture of silent approval confirmed to his pupil the magnitude of his progress in these bodily arts. Hatsuka, returning the smile with grateful eyes, understood without need for words that the goal was very close. Only the final touches were needed for his tired earthly body to definitively cease being an anguishing burden, becoming instead a suitable vehicle for traveling the paths of enlightenment. Many winters had passed since that fateful day when Hatsuka had presented himself, dejected, at his mentor's door, desperately seeking an escape from the calvary of physical pains that threatened to destroy his monastic vocation even before it could bloom. But now, evaluating his journey from a distance, Hatsuka could only feel gratitude for the afflictive blessing of those sufferings that he came to embrace as precious teachers in the art of completely dissociating matter and spirit. Sitting peacefully under his favorite tree in the monastery gardens, the young monk of yesterday, now advanced in years, remembered with nostalgia and affection that process of lustrous years where he learned to explore every recess of bodily geography through careful mindfulness introspection, to quiet even the faintest whisper of thoughts thanks to prolonged meditation focused on simple sensations, and to re-educate each muscle and tendon in the art of conscious movement with the gentle assistance of yoga. Thus, with unshakable devotion, what had once seemed an insurmountable wall cruelly interposing between his being and his long for spiritual enlightenment gradually transformed into a bridge, until one day, not very different from others, upon emerging from his usual morning meditation, Hatsuka was surprised by the absolute certainty that never again in his life would he involuntarily identify with the passing tribulations of that biological vehicle we call the body. Episodes of physical pain still manifested, of course, obedient to the implacable laws of cellular aging, but now he received them simply as transitory phenomena lacking all substance, already incapable of breaking his unshakable equanimity or detracting from the completeness of each moment of full consciousness in the eternal now. And it was then that Hatsuka knew he was prepared to continue the legacy of his beloved master Yoshi, who had departed for the heavens shortly before, after sowing so much wisdom in still earthly pilgrims. When exchanging complicit glances with the elderly monk during his final days on his deathbed, both understood without need for words that Hatsuka was finally ready to guide others along that luminous path. Thus, with the ineffable joy of those who have received everything and yearn for nothing more than to share, the young man now continued his vital mission of revealing to those in need those ancient techniques for dissolving the poison of suffering, turning it into medicine. bequeathing those noble teachings that had once saved him from losing hope in the promise of enlightenment. And so we conclude the story of Hatsuka, the Buddhist monk who managed to overcome his intense physical pains thanks to the wise guidance of his mentor and his own unshakable discipline in putting millennial teachings into practice. His journey reveals a great truth that we often forget in this modern era: mind and body are indissolubly connected. Any chronic pain that does not yield to conventional treatments has an important mental and emotional component fueling the fire. The Buddhists knew this for more than 2,500 years and developed an extensive system of both physical and mental practices to help the adept gain control over pain perception through a profound transformation of their relationship with the body. Practices such as mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and the cultivation of qualities like equanimity and compassion are central pieces in this system. In essence, it is a process of deep listening to the body's language through expanded consciousness to retake the reins of the subconscious and deprogram harmful reactions to pain. Although our materialistic culture often disdains these holistic approaches as too esoteric, more and more scientific studies confirm their surprising effectiveness when practiced diligently. Next, we will analyze some of the fundamental Buddhist concepts and habits for reducing chronic muscle pain, as proven firsthand by Hatsuka and many other monks. One of the most revolutionary Buddhist concepts for the West is that of mindfulness, usually translated as deliberate full attention. It is the ability to pay focused attention to the present moment without judging it or reacting automatically. This quality is developed like a muscle through a meditative practice also known as vipassana. Through body scanning techniques, the practitioner learns to cultivate neutral observation of physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts as they flow in each moment without being carried away by them. When applying this equanimous vigilance to sensations associated with chronic muscle pain, something very interesting usually occurs. The intensity of the pain begins to decrease or becomes more tolerable. This happens due to a change in the patient's relationship with the painful sensation. By observing it attentively but without rejecting or attaching to it, the suffering loses momentum. It finds nowhere to hook onto. Conversely, when we try to actively suppress or ignore an uncomfortable sensation, we usually end up focusing even more attention and energy on it, exacerbating it. It's like trying to force an imaginary pink elephant to disappear. The more we fight it, the more real it becomes. Through equanimous full vigilance, we can begin to distinguish where chronic tensions lodge in our body, generally associated with recurring emotions such as stress, anxiety, anguish, anger, or sadness. Many muscle pains are generated and maintained precisely by this accumulation of unreleased tensions. By maintaining an open and impartial awareness of bodily sensations, we can detect where these knots of stagnant energy concentrate in the form of contractures and latent inflammations, and once identified, we'll know exactly where and how to intervene through massages, stretches, breathing exercises, or even emotional therapies. In this way, the development of mindfulness becomes an invaluable skill not only for managing chronic muscle pain but for taking the reins of our integral well-being. It allows us to explore the interior of the body's temple with kind curiosity, without silencing any signal, to regain contact with regions of our being long forgotten due to the frenetic rhythm of modern life. Another cornerstone of the Buddhist system for mitigating suffering is the practice of meditation, particularly developing the ability to focus attention solely on breathing for prolonged periods. This generates a state of deep calm that benefits both mental and physical levels. This is because there is normally an intimate interdependence between the thoughts crossing our mind and the tensions lodging in our body. When the former becomes agitated, the latter tends to contract, and vice versa. Therefore, quieting the mental storm becomes indispensable for relaxing bodily tensions. One of the most common obstacles in meditative practice is precisely physical discomfort, pains, cramps, tingling, and impulses to move often bother even experienced meditators, stealing their concentration. This reveals how deeply rooted chronic tensions tend to be. However, by centering all attentional focus solely on the sensations around the nostrils caused by breathing, the parasympathetic pathways responsible for inducing calm and deep relaxation are activated. Thus, little by little, the restless mind begins to quiet, allowing the body to follow, loosening previously imperceptible tensions. Neuroimaging studies have shown that even 8 weeks of regular meditation practice focused on breathing generates tangible changes in brain areas related to emotion regulation, memory, and self-awareness. Likewise, notable reductions have been verified in levels of stress-related hormones like cortisol. All this has a very significant analgesic effect on chronic pains such as migraines, fibromyalgia, or different types of muscle and joint inflammations, substantially improving patients' quality of life. But the benefits don't end there. By expanding knowledge of our own mental patterns, our capacity to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively when we experience problematic emotions also grows. And it is precisely these compulsive responses that most often perpetuate cycles of suffering and pain. In this way, both the growing physical quietude and mental equanimity cultivated through disciplined meditation practice focused on breathing combine in a virtuous circle of positive feedback, facilitating an integral relief of pain that very few conventional treatments achieve. It's fascinating to discover how deeply ancient Eastern wisdom already understood the intimate relationship between body and mind. Bodily practices like yoga and Tai Chi not only exercise muscles and joints but constitute sophisticated systems for harmonizing the physical and mental. Yoga in particular consists of a series of postures or asanas that are executed slowly and consciously, carefully coordinating breathing. There are standing, sitting, inclined, and inverted postures that mobilize every corner of the body with gentleness but firmness. By maintaining each position for a certain time, a dual effect is generated. On one hand, it strengthens the musculature and flexibility of ligaments and tendons. But on the other, it also activates proprioception mechanisms that allow awareness of chronically defective postural patterns so they can be corrected. When some regions remain hunched or contracted for a long time, the brain ends up normalizing this posture. Only upon introducing movement and realignment do we notice how tensioned these forgotten areas remained. And it is in these physical knots where emotional tensions accumulated over years tend to nest. Tai Chi applies the same principles of conscious mobility and deep breathing, but linking each posture in a harmonious dance that imitates the sway of waves or the movements of animals and birds in nature. It is a meditation in movement. Both disciplines, yoga and Tai Chi, prove invaluable for alleviating all types of muscular ailments resulting from chronic rigidities and unreleased tensions. There are abundant studies corroborating significant improvements in back, neck, knee injuries, and joint inflammations in both athletes and sedentary office workers. But beyond their already proven physical benefits, these practices act as bodily psychotherapy, allowing emotions buried for years in the body's folds to surface. Emotions that manifest as chronic pains or a latent sensation of malaise. Connecting lovingly and consciously with forgotten temples of our being, like the pelvis, belly, or chest, often triggers revealing awareness about deeply rooted mental patterns or limiting beliefs that are at the root of all pain that resists disappearing. In this way, mixing exercise with self-observation, mobility with meditative stillness, these Eastern practices achieve a perfect balance between strengthening the body and expanding consciousness, constituting powerful allies for healing stubborn pains. One of the great discoveries of Buddhist meditators is that much of the torment associated with a painful sensation resides not so much in the intensity of the stimulus but in our attitude toward it. When we resist and desperately fight to suppress the discomfort, it seems to feed on that very energy and root itself more deeply. Just as frantically struggling to escape quicksand only sinks the unwary walker faster, opposing physical pain head-on tends to exacerbate the suffering, generating a vicious cycle of negative feedback that's difficult to break. Modern medicine focuses almost obsessively on chemically eliminating any sensation cataloged as harmful, silencing symptoms, but ignoring deep causes. But millennial wisdom reminds us that pain always fulfills some primordial alert function, and it's worth investigating its message. After all, pain is nothing more than another group of sensations with a certain tinge of discomfort. It is always our preconceived ideas about what these stimuli mean that cause true suffering. When we judge pain as an unacceptable enemy that shouldn't be there, only then do we begin to suffer. That's why Buddhists develop specific meditative techniques to change the relationship with painful sensation. Instead of fighting it, it's about welcoming it with equanimity like any other event in the becoming of our experience, granting it the same quiet and benevolent space as a breeze caressing the face or a bird's song. By neither rejecting nor clinging to it, the sensation loses momentum, and both its intensity and our reactivity begin to subside. It's like depriving a bonfire of oxygen. After a time, it ends up reduced to embers that can no longer expand. Of course, achieving this equanimity in the face of episodes of acute physical pain requires much patience, discipline, and constancy in meditative practice. It may take time, but it ends up freeing us even from refractory physical pains that we believed indelible. It is surprising to see how emphatically Buddhism emphasizes the importance of properly caring for our bodily vehicle through healthy eating and rest habits. Buddhist monks usually follow very strict dietary guidelines, completely eliminating toxic or overstimulating substances such as alcohol, tobacco, and other narcotics. They even avoid foods that could alter their mental clarity before prolonged meditation sessions. Recent studies corroborate that there is an intimate interdependence between intestinal flora, the immune system, and people's emotional state. Eating in certain ways directly modulates the production of neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine, thus affecting our physical and mental well-being or discomfort. Buddhists always emphasize the importance of ingesting pure, fresh, and nutritious foods, consciously chewing each bite as an extension of meditative practice. Eating automatically or voraciously was considered harmful to both physical health and mental lucidity. On the other hand, besides caring for the fuel entering the organism, Buddhism also greatly emphasizes the need to allow the body adequate rest to repair damaged tissues and strengthen defenses. Current medical science has already amply demonstrated that sleeping too little or poorly has enormous negative consequences for practically any ailment. Hormones are altered, immunity decreases, inflammation circuits are perpetuated, etc. For all these reasons, Buddhist monks usually retire early to sleep after completing their meditation routines and are particularly attentive to any sign of excessive fatigue. They consider restorative rest as important as conscious eating or spiritual practice itself. It's worth noting that the idea is not to become obsessive about these self-care guidelines or transform them into a new restrictive cage. Balance is fundamental, but it is evident that some degree of conscious discipline over our diet and sleep habits will result in a healthier organism and therefore less prone to chronic pains. As in so many other aspects, here too the Buddhists seem to have been centuries ahead of Western science. Only now are we rediscovering ancient truths about personal responsibility regarding our bodily habits and their power to mitigate all types of ailments when they are deficiently attended to. And here ends today's video. This was Monk Wisdom. I hope it has taught you something new and that your life improves thanks to my teachings. Until the next video.